I'm John Grafft, and I love Chicago real estate. Between showings, I stop in my favorite places, talk with local business owners, and bring their story to you. This is my Chicago.
Yeah, so depreciation is probably a good place to start. So talking about the tax implications of owning real estate's an area that most people screw up, or an area that most people don't really understand the pros and the cons of it. So a lot of people, when they're investing in real estate, they know that it can generate income for them. They know that they're able to write off their expenses. You can write off your mortgage interest. You can depreciate the property, which is something most people have heard of but don't really understand. Mm-hmm. Basically, what the government's assuming is that the property's worth less next year than it is this year. And they're allowing you to take some of that value as you go.
What I like about depreciation, I remember sitting in my accounting class and I was like, you can't depreciate land, right? Because they're not assuming that the real estate value is going down. They're assuming that your building is worth less because it's 1 year older.
Right.
And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, like these tiles right here, these are on the ceiling. These don't get used. No one's touching these. But look, around the pool table, they're all messed up.
Yep.
Right? Because people are hitting them. And this carpet, it's going to be a little more worn. So you're going to have to improve this in 5 years. And that depreciation, I always saw it as the government being like, okay, we know your building is getting used. We want you to reinvest in your building. Here's a little incentive to do it.
Yeah, where most people don't understand the back end of that is if your property actually isn't worth less, when you go to sell it, you owe all that depreciation back.
When you go to sell it.
When you go to sell it. Uh-huh. So on the front end, let's just talk in round figures. So you buy a house that's worth $100,000. Roundabout, you're going to depreciate about $4,000 a year.
And so that's based on the sales price.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's based on
nothing to do with actual value, just whatever you paid for it.
Correct. Whatever you paid for it. Mm-hmm. So you're going to depreciate $4,000 a year, regardless whether the property value goes up, down, or stays the same. You're going to depreciate about $4,000 a year. So you own it for 10 years, you get to the end of this, you've depreciated about $40,000. Great, property's worth more now, say it's worth $150,000 now, 10 years later. Now you go to sell it, and you're all excited because you've depreciated all this time, you have a great gain on it, you know you're gonna have to pay some taxes, but most people don't realize quite how much. What most people don't realize is all that depreciation you took, when you sell it, you owe it all back. Mm-hmm. So take that $40,000, that gets added to your income day one as soon as you sell it. Any gains you had above that, you're also going to pay capital gains on.
So does your depreciation get deducted from your total profit?
Yeah, absolutely.
So whatever your profit is, so if your profit,
the taxes you owe.
The tax you owe. So let's say, let's use your example. It's $100,000. Mm-hmm. You've had it for 10 years. So you have $40,000 of depreciation over those 10 years. Let's say it's worth $200,000 now. And you sell it for $200,000, so you have a $100,000 net gain, or gross gain, and then you deduct $40,000 from that.
So make sure we're clear it up a little bit.
Okay.
So $40,000 you're gonna owe, regardless of what that top end of that sale price is.
Okay.
As long as it's over $100,000, $40,000 is what you're going to owe in depreciation. It's what's called depreciation recapture.
What if you don't, let's say you bought the property for 100, now it's worth 100 still 10 years later, and you sell it. Do you still pay back that 40,000 of recapture?
Yes.
So no matter what.
Absolutely.
So it isn't taken off the top, it's there.
Yeah. The only way you're not going to pay that recapture is if you bought it for 100, you depreciated 40, and you sold it for 60.
Okay.
Then you're not going to owe any recapture.
Okay.
But in the example we're talking about, you bought it for 100, you owned it for 10 years, you sold it for 200. You're going to owe capital gains on everything from 100 to 200. So call it 15%. You're going to owe $15,000 in taxes there. And then the $40,000 you've depreciated, you owe that back too.
So you don't even get to deduct that.
No.
Yeah. No. Still cap gains on the whole 100%,
yes,
100,000.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so most people just don't realize quite how much in taxes they're actually going to owe when they go to sell the property. And a common thing that I've heard from people is they say, okay, well, then I won't take the depreciation. Year by year, I won't take the depreciation. That actually doesn't get you away from it. So
Really?
even if you don't take the depreciation, when you go to sell it, the government requires you pay recapture, quote, whether taken or not.
Wow, I didn't know
So
that.
whether or not you wanted to take the depreciation, you're gonna owe it. So you're better to take it than not.
Can you give a client example, something that's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a client that's going to sell a property right now. So the idea was they own this rental in Chicago, and it's appreciated significantly. And the idea was they were going to sell the property up here, move down to Tennessee, buy a house. So they expected that everything that they've had in terms of a gain, that they're going to owe taxes on that. They kind of built that into their equation.
Okay.
They did not realize that they owe all the depreciation back because they've owned the house for about 30 years. And they're depreciating, I don't remember the exact, but it's about $20,000 a year of depreciation.
Okay.
Across 30 years. They're going to have about a $500,000 income when they sell the property just from the depreciation recapture. Now, this is where recapture gets you in trouble, or where depreciation gets you in trouble. So, in this example, if you had, say, $20,000 of deductions for your depreciation each year, you're probably depreciating that. Most people are doing that in either a 12% or a 22% tax bracket.
Okay.
But say you've owned that property for 30 years. Now you have a $500,000, $600,000 total depreciation. When you go to sell that, you don't pay that tax back in a 12 or a 22% bracket. You're going to pay that back at a 37% bracket.
Okay.
Because it's all income today. You all of a sudden have
So
a
on the,
$500,000 or $600,000 income on top of whatever else you have.
so you're basically getting a 1099 for the recapture,
Yeah.
and then you have to pay taxes on that. So they look at it as income, and then you have to pay additional. So then you have to pay taxes on that. So are you actually paying back the total amount, or are you just paying the taxes on that amount?
So it's taxable income, so you're going to pay the taxes back on it.
Okay, got it. So if you had $100,000 of recapture, you're not paying back $100,000. You're gonna pay
Yeah.
tax on the $100,000.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Makes sense.
But that's where a lot of people get screwed up with, when they're putting the formula together of
So
how
you're
much
doing it
I
on
might make
today's
from
value.
this.
That's huge. Yeah, because
Right.
it's not based on. Well, will that fluctuate based on your income level?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is where people who are in a high tax bracket while they're working get a lot of advantage from depreciation. So if you're, for example, doctor, lawyer, you have a high income today, but by the time you retire, you might not have as high of an income, it can make a lot of sense because you can buy property, get a depreciation, deduction today against your already high income, and you may be in a position 20 or 30 years from now where your income isn't as high.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that works out. Most of the time it's a wash.
So I guess it's about you're just
Think about-
delaying the punishment.
Yeah, think of depreciation more like a loan
Yeah.
than a gift. Yeah. So it's much more a loan than a gift because you're going to pay it back. I mean, unless you bought in 2008 and sold in 2009, most people that have owned property are selling it for more than they bought it for.
Yeah.
So real estate doesn't always go up in value, but it's certainly had a pretty good trend.
So looking at real estate, looking at the clients that come to you with a portfolio, it's clearly better if they come to you earlier. So you're able to manage these things better, you're able to plan better. What are the advantages for people owning real estate as a primary residence? And then I'm going to ask you as an investment, and I'm going to flip that and give you the negatives. So let's start with the positives. If I want to own real estate, like I know you rent, and I notice a lot of the times that people in financial planning, people that are entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners don't necessarily own real estate. I see them renting all the time. When I talk to them, there's lots of different reasons. I think a lot of it's flexibility. They don't know what they're able to have. Maybe they see a big upside coming up later and they'll want to buy something then.
Sure.
Maybe they need every accessible dollar reinvested in the business instead of their home. And that's always one of the arguments I look at when I'm thinking about buying or renting or whatever my situation is.
Sure.
It's like, okay, let's say I'm going to put 20% down. Well, what's the best use of that 20%? Is it sitting in this property for X amount of years? Or should I just put that in the S&P? Or do I have access to some other type of investment vehicle? What are your positives for owning real estate as a primary residence?
So owning real estate as a primary residence used to have bigger advantages than it does now. Part of that,
salt?
yeah, because of the SALT deductions. So
explain that.
So in the past, you were able to, I'll start with, you have to pay real estate taxes when you own property.
Yeah, no way around that.
No way around that. You're gonna pay real estate taxes. If you opt not to pay real estate taxes, you're gonna find out that a few years later, someone's gonna come back and buy your real estate taxes from underneath you, and now they own your property.
Yeah.
So you're gonna pay real estate taxes. Before the Trump tax cuts, you were able to essentially deduct all of that. Whatever you were paying towards real estate taxes, you could deduct 100%.
What could you deduct?
So you could deduct everything you put into state income taxes. You could deduct your real estate taxes. You could deduct a higher amount of mortgage interest than you can today. There were some other various deduction changes that they made, but let's keep it focused towards real estate.
We'll be on the high level here. We don't need to get down to super specifics.
Right. But basically what they did was they set a combination of your state income taxes and your real estate taxes, and they set a cap at what you're able to deduct.
Okay.
And the cap is $10,000, and that's regardless of where you live in the world.
Or what your
in the
income
country,
is or anything.
Or what your income is. So if you're a married couple, just give the example, if you're a married couple and the two of you make $200,000 combined and you live in the state of Illinois, you're essentially paying $10,000 in state income tax. So regardless of what your real estate taxes are, you're not able to deduct any of that now.
Yeah.
You're already at your $10,000 cap.
Just because of your income tax.
Just because of your income taxes.
Yeah.
Now,
you know what's crazy about that is it came from Trump, who's the real estate guy.
Right.
I remember seeing that and I was like, from Trump? Really?
Yeah.
And I always wondered what the agenda was behind that, or the justification. And they brought up teachers who couldn't deduct, buying supplies for their classes and all these different things. Anyway, tangent.
Yeah, it was a very interesting tax law to come out from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients that own multiple properties in Illinois. I have a lot of clients that have high earned income. And I can tell you what, that tax cut did not help them one bit.
Yeah.
They're paying more in taxes now than they were 4 years ago across the board because they don't have the same deductions, and the break in tax rates, the actual bracket change, didn't make up for that difference.
So what was that? What was the bracket change?
So when that was the actual federal tax brackets, so went down from 27 to 24, 25 to 22.
Okay.
So the actual rates you were paying went down.
And that's only if you're making high enough income.
Right, and it's only if you're making a high enough income.
Yeah.
But I have clients that lost $40,000 or $50,000 a year of deductions.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because, let's face it, we live in, you and I are in Chicago.
Yeah.
Real estate taxes are outrageous.
Yeah, we're paying about
They've been
2%
going
here.
up, 30% a year?
Yeah,
the last several
year was
years.
the only year we got some relief.
Yeah.
And that's just because we're paying taxes in arrears and COVID happened. That's what I think.
Sure.
So like COVID happened, okay, my taxes got raised by $100. Well, the year before they got raised by $600.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I have parents that live in Wheaton. Most people that live in Wheaton are paying north of $10,000 a year in real estate taxes.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive area of the world to live in. The Trump tax cuts, entirely different impact if you live in rural Kentucky. But at the same time, unless you have high enough.
Adam's from Kentucky. You need a little arm up.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
There you go. A little shout out. Yeah. But even then, most people can't take advantage of the deductions anymore anyways. They raised the standard deduction to $12,000 for an individual, $24,000 for a married couple. And because of the SALT tax cap.
And let's say, you just said it sounded like assault. So SALT, S-A-L-T.
S-A-L-T.
What's that stand
SALT.
for, do you remember? That's okay.
It's an acronym.
Yeah,
but
some acronym. We'll throw it up on the screen.
Yeah. But even if you're a married couple, you have to have considerable donations, mortgage interest, medical expenses. You have to have a lot of other deductions before you can even touch your real estate.
Okay.
The advantages of owning property, and these are things that I lose out on as a renter. I want to be able to improve my place, but I can't stomach the idea of putting money into a place that I don't own.
Yeah.
Similarly, my building would actually charge me for doing it.
Yeah.
Because they would have to, whatever I change, they would have to revert back to how it was to rent it out.
Yep.
So it makes no sense. I can't make the space my own. I can't do what I want with it. On the other end, if something breaks, it's also not my fault.
Yeah.
It's not my problem. You know, I moved in and the garbage disposal didn't work. It was dumping water all over the floor. Okay, fine. I called the building, I let them know. It was changed out the next day.
Yeah.
My refrigerator ice machine broke. Normally, that's something I would have fixed on my own. I called the building. They didn't fix the ice machine, they replaced the refrigerator.
Yeah.
Right?
Things like that always crack me up too, because I've been an owner for so long. If there's a problem, like the water on the ground you just said, I'm like, oh my God, my floors are gonna buckle. I need to take care of this right now. You need to figure out the source. When you're a renter, you're just like, yeah, you need to come deal with this. I mean, the floors buckle, it's your problem. I don't wanna live in it. I want you to fix this. But then it falls on the landlord. And there's a wide range of the quality of landlords. And some people let things wait. They do the deference.
Yeah.
And it causes much bigger problems.
Yeah, let's not forget to get back to this when we talk about the pros and cons of renting real estate.
Yeah.
But the fact that your renter doesn't care about your property is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I have a lot of pride of ownership, even if I'm renting a place.
Yeah.
I have a lot of pride of ownership.
Home pride.
Right.
Yeah.
So when the garbage disposal broke and it dumped water all over the floor, I cleaned it up.
Yeah.
I stuck a bag underneath the garbage disposal so it wouldn't damage the place. And I waited until they fixed it.
You know, that's a great topic. So
But not everyone does.
I was walking through this property with buyers once, and they had one of those boot holding things or shoe holder things that a lot of people use in the winter. And she's like, what is that? I was like, well, they do that so the water from all the snow doesn't, leak into the floors. And she's like, oh, I just always leave mine in the hallway. I'm like, well, that's the difference between renting and owning.
Yeah,
and it's true. It's
absolutely.
like if you rent, you don't care about that. You don't care about all the water just leaking into the carpet and that mold growing and that smell forming, all those things. When you're an owner, now you're an owner in this condo association. That particular building that I'm referring to has 7 units in it, because my clients ended up buying that place. There's 7 floors, 14. So it's a small association, but kind of nice.
Sure.
Because they have an elevator, small things, lower assessment, but really nice space, boutique building. But every owner there is meticulous. Like the building looks great because you have 14 people that care.
Yeah, and that's a big difference between what I've seen in people that buy and people that rent. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
100%. And people don't understand these things about ownership. It's like, I think you were there. We were talking about sanitary napkins, tampons, and putting grease down the drain. Were you there for that conversation with Alana?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
And I commented that I pour grease down my drain because
was
I don't own the place.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people that own, there's a bunch of people standing there, and I don't know, there were like 10 people there or something, but pretty much everyone knew not to do that. Most of those people owned homes. The one person that's been renting forever, they're like, I pour my grease down the drain and I put my tampons in the toilet. I'm like, oh my God, you're like the renter from hell. Yeah, right. You're clogging up the drains everywhere with everything.
Right. When they're tearing up the corner of the road to replace a joint in the main piping, a lot of the time it's grease.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, I mean, that stuff, anyways, not what we're here to talk about. But advantage of actually owning your property is They used to have more because you're able to do things like deduct off your taxes, which I think has actually affected property values.
It has.
Especially in higher end property.
It's decreased the value of higher end property because now you can't deduct these things.
Right.
You put a limit on it.
Right. And that works into the formula of what your buyers can afford,
Mm-hmm.
which works into how many people can afford to buy your property. And if you don't have the demand, your price has to come down.
When I know some people who have the cash to do it, they purchase properties in some type of financial, in some type of entity. And so they own an LLC now. Now, if you own an LLC, you can make all those deductions because now it's an investment, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so people have created that scheme to get around it. And that's been the advantages of being a landlord. You have all those deductions versus home ownership where you don't.
Yeah, and so home ownership has its other benefits, right, versus renting. You eventually do build equity in a property, but as I would tell my clients, I wouldn't expect to be able to draw that equity out.
Yeah.
It's not like you're building a retirement portfolio in your home, and reverse mortgages are an option, but they're not a great one.
Yeah.
For most people.
Why is that? Explain what a reverse mortgage is.
So a reverse mortgage is basically taking a loan against your house in retirement. So your house is worth $300,000. They'll give you $250,000 line of credit against your house. Now, it can make a lot of sense if you're planning on living there your entire life, if if you're not worried about inheritance or anything else. It actually can make sense for people. Mm-hmm. The issue is now you're in debt to the bank. You can't move. You can't get out of the house. You have no equity anymore. A lot of the time you don't have any equity anymore in the property. You're basically tied to that property now. You can't sell it. It starts limiting your options.
Yeah, if you sell, you have to pay back that loan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, where it can make a lot of sense is you're a single person, you take a reverse mortgage on your house, you're planning on living there the whole time, you get an extra pot of money that you can draw on, and when eventually you pass away, the bank's stuck with it.
Yeah, let them deal with it.
And it actually doesn't matter what the value of the property did. The bank is stuck with whatever that value is.
I've had a few client scenarios, usually estates, and someone did this reverse mortgage. Property, I do the comps, and I'm like, this property's worth $400K. They're like, the bank gave my dad $450 5 years ago.
Right.
They're like,
that's the bank's problem.
That's the best deal that ever came.
Yeah. And that's 100% the bank's
That's
problem.
their risk, yeah.
Yeah. This is getting a little into the weeds, but what you can do, what can make sense is early in retirement, you take out a reverse mortgage on your property. You don't actually use any of the line of credit though.
Okay, so you let it sit. You don't draw it.
Right, you don't draw it. And the reason for that is the bank will allow that line of credit to grow at 3% a year every year.
You let it sit there?
Even if you let it sit there. Now you have to have a minimum balance on it. So you have to put, say, $100 on the line of credit.
Okay.
Similar to keeping a home equity line open. You have to have some dollar amount on it. So you put $100 on the reverse mortgage, whatever dollar amount they gave you as a line of credit is going to grow by 3% a year. You don't have to care about the value of the house. It's 3% a year regardless. So it's grown by 3% a year.
Some markets, that's better appreciation than you're going to get.
Some markets, it's better appreciation than you're going to get, and it's a federally set level. So
really? Okay, so those are regulated, because there's an age too, right?
There is.
Okay.
I don't do them enough offhand.
Yeah.
So, but that is a strategy that works really well to give you basically access to an additional pot of money. Now, where I've seen people use that is they'll take a reverse mortgage out, so they have this line of credit, and then in a circumstance like a 2008 or a March of 2020, COVID pandemic sort of scenario in the stock market, the stock market's taken a 40% or 50% drop. Instead of spending the money that they had invested, they start using the line of credit.
Got it.
When the market inevitably recovers, they take money out of the market, they pay back the line of credit.
Okay.
But it allows them not to, basically absorb a big loss.
I've always looked at it as flexibility.
Right.
It gives someone a lot of flexibility, and it's unfortunate when someone has to use it. But if someone doesn't have to use it, you can take a gamble in that you have the scenario. You're like, okay, the market's been up for so long. They're giving us an appraisal of 450. I don't see it. Like they brought in some guy who doesn't live in this town or isn't familiar with this area. He overappraised the property.
Yeah.
In that case, you should probably take the reverse mortgage. The bank isn't there doing their due diligence. They should be penalized for it. They'll get hurt for it. That's business.
Yeah. Oh, and similar to any mortgage closing, there are costs involved to it.
Oh, so
they're
many.
typically worth it.
So let's transition right into why you shouldn't own a home, because fees are always part of that conversation. People are looking at a home they want to buy, and I'm like, they're like, oh, I can't lose. I'm like, oh, when you sell this, it's going to cost X, right? 8 to 10% in this state.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
So exactly. So there's typically a holding period around where it starts to make sense to own a home, and it's several years. You do more of the actual transactional, so you probably know exactly where that sweet spot is.
Yeah. Whenever I have this conversation, when I do a buyer's consult, I'm talking to someone for the first time. I'm like, okay, if you're going to be here for 3 or more years, you're going to be here for 3 years, consider buying. If you're going to be here for 5 years, you have to buy.
Sure.
Any longer than that, and you're kind of just giving money to somebody else, there's no point. I like to look at renting as this beautiful way to have flexibility. But if you're going to be rooted somewhere, don't pay someone else's mortgage.
Yeah, and that's, we've been referencing me a couple of times. That's the situation I'm in.
Yes.
I like the place I'm living in. I have a lot of social area and outdoor space and things that I appreciate.
And you couldn't buy this, by the way.
And I could not buy it. I couldn't buy it anywhere else.
That's a great argument for renting too. Access to things that otherwise you couldn't have.
Right. You actually could not have my setup in any other.
I don't know where you can
We
buy
have
that
one
in
friend
Westwood.
who has a similar.
Yes.
Yeah. But you'll never come across it.
It's so rare.
And rare enough that even if it exists, you have to hope that it's available. Right.
And you have to jump on it right then. Like, you have to be looking when it finally does come available. Then you have to put in the right offer, and you might be overpaying because of its perceived demand.
Right. So, so for me, it has a lot of flexibility. I'm not married. I don't know that I want to stay in West Loop in Chicago. I don't know if I want to move to a different neighborhood in the city. I don't know if I want to move to the suburbs. I know that what I would want to buy for myself today isn't what I would want to buy if I was married. So until then, and I don't know what that time frame looks like, there's really no sense in me buying because it could be a year from now, it could be 3 years from now, it could be 5 years from now. I really don't know what that time frame looks like. And the last thing I want to do is buy a place, renovate it, make it everything I want it to be, and then, move somebody into my life and we gotta uproot, move somewhere else, or renovate, or my style isn't her style, or...
When you lack the flexibility, right?
Right. And then I'm stuck.
Then you're stuck.
Because then I wouldn't want to move either.
What if you can't? What if you can't sell it? There's all these things that can come into play. And I think until you know you're gonna be somewhere, it's so smart to rent. Yeah.
Otherwise, if you know you're gonna be somewhere long-term, you're rooted in, I have young couples as clients who have, the two of them are married, great partnership, starting a family, a couple little ones at this point. They know that where they live is where they're going to live for the next probably 20 years.
Yeah. And you're investing in your neighborhood. You're becoming an integral part of it. And part of that is owning in your neighborhood.
Yeah. And there is a big difference looking at neighborhoods where people own versus where people rent.
Oh, yeah.
The quality of the landscaping in Gold Coast is markedly better than in West Loop. There is trash, and it's not like a big deal, but there's trash on the street here that I wouldn't see in more ownership-driven neighborhoods versus renting.
You're right.
Most of West Loop is renters.
Yeah, because the renter here they're not going to go and text the landlord or go complain to management that the bushes outside need to be trimmed. But I can tell you in a condo building, they're going to get 5 emails minimum from just whoever left that day. Be like, hey, I pay HOA fees, and why isn't this done?
Absolutely.
It's a complete different flip of where you're coming from.
But so owning long-term is financially can be great because by the time you actually, now we're talking years down the line, by the time you've actually paid off a mortgage, all of a sudden your day-to-day living expenses become very little.
Yeah.
You know, there's no happier retiree than somebody that has almost no fixed expenses. Cars paid off, no credit cards, no mortgage. You know, they might need $1,000, $2,000 a month to pay their bills. Now they might spend more than that, and most of them do. But they're the happiest people in the world because they know this is all they need.
That's that Florida life.
Exactly. Versus I have clients that rent in retirement, and all of a sudden that minimum bar is at $5,000 or $6,000 a month.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that do that.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, pre-COVID, there were a lot of people that lived in the suburbs. They became empty nesters. Then they started renting in the city. And I never thought about it from the perspective you just brought up, that they gave up this low monthly expense to get a much higher one in retirement.
Yeah.
And how nice would it be just to have next to nothing in retirement? It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, next to no expenses.
Yeah, you're just going out every night.
It's huge. I mean, they do surveys of retirees. All the happiest people are people who have low expenses and guaranteed sources of income coming in.
Yeah.
So it's people that have Social Security, pensions, annuities. People that have paid off their bills are all the happiest, most content retirees day to day, because they don't have to worry about it.
I don't think anyone wants to die with debt, even though
No, they don't.
Even though it kind of feels like that's what you should do, like just rack up that debt in the end. But no one wants to do that. You know, it's not the right thing to do.
It's not practical.
Yeah.
For most people. You know, I have this conversation all the time with clients where we say, you know, kind of what's the goal? We might have family, we might not. Do we want to leave an inheritance? Do we want to do charitable giving? Do we want to, you know, kind of what does that look like to you? Because say we have, you know, a couple $1 million, you're not really going to be spending it.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, they're not really going to be spending it. What do we want to do?
Well, they have this modest lifestyle to earn all that half the time.
Right.
And now they have it all at their fingertips.
Most people won't change.
Yeah.
Now I'll encourage them to fly first class instead of coach and, you know, whatever. But if I think my client's not hurting themselves long term, I will always encourage them to spend money and enjoy it. It's got to be about their goals, but, you know, people tell me all the time, I wish my mom and dad spent more of their own money.
Yeah.
I know I inherited all this, but I wish my mom and dad spent more of it.
Yeah.
They were always pinching pennies. They were always trying to be as frugal as they could be. And I just don't think they enjoyed life the way they could have. And so on the other end of that, when I'm working with mom and dad, I'm encouraging them that, hey, you can afford to spend it. You can afford to do nice things. I've had clients come in that I'm managing several $1 million for who say, you know, we haven't replaced the couch in 25 years.
Still has the plastic on it, it's good.
Right. And like, yeah, it baffles me at times, but I also understand that that's how they got where they are.
Yeah.
That's how they built this.
Yeah.
But now that we're here, I'm like, can I please send you money from your account so you can buy a couch? Right. But anyway, so the long-term benefit of buying and owning real estate can be great, especially for a personal residence. Getting into the tax end of that, we gave up some of the deductions that you had along the way, but actually owning the real estate can be a really good thing if you have, if it's your personal residence, if your primary residence. So you mentioned a little bit ago, people owning primary residences in an LLC so that they could get deductions. So that's one way to get deductions. The issue you run into is when you go to sell it, now you're still subject to recapture capital gains.
Yeah.
If it's your primary residence, you own it directly, like yourself. As a single person, every year you live there, you can write off, it's a maximum, so you get a maximum deduction of gains of up to $250,000.
Okay.
As an individual. You get up to $500,000 as a married couple.
That's when you sell it, right?
When you sell it.
Okay.
So let's say you've lived somewhere for 30 years and then you decide to move. You bought it for $100,000. 30 years later, it's worth $500,000. That's a really common thing around here.
Yeah.
Especially in the Chicagoland area.
Yeah.
That's all tax-free to you if you're a married couple.
You know, you're still going to pay back the recapture.
No.
Right? No.
Well, no. So if primary residence, you're not depreciating anything.
Good point. Yeah.
You're not depreciating anything.
That's right.
But so that whole 100 to 500, all tax-free to you.
Tax-free. What I love about that is you can do that for every 2 out of 5 years, right?
Right.
So as long as you live there for 2 years, you're good to go.
Yeah. It's actually a decent way to unwind rental property, although I will say...
So move into your rental property?
Move into your rental properties. What I'll tell you is most people, in my experience, don't buy rental properties that they would ever live in.
Yeah.
So...
Absolutely true.
Right.
I've never met one person that would live in the property they own.
Right.
Yeah.
So that tends not to... Most people would rather pay the tax than live in the property.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the above board way to do it. Some people just change their address. It's not going to get into auditing from the IRS.
What's so crazy?
It's a nightmare.
Try to evade
but...
it. You can always avoid your taxes. You can't evade them.
Right.
Okay, so negatives. Homeownership.
Everything's on you. It's a square piece of wood that you just dump money into.
Yeah.
Right. You own a place in the burbs. Congratulations, you had bugs. You had whatever, a tree came down on the house.
Yeah.
Whatever happened, right? Anything that happens to that building is all on you.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to have cash to handle it. Now there's insurance for some things, and for some of the more dramatic things, there's insurance for it. But houses are expensive. It's not a cheap proposition either. The rough math, if you bought and all the expenses that go along with it 30 years later versus you rented and all those additional expenses you would normally have you saved, you actually end up about the same place.
Say that again.
If you rent, you're avoiding some of these other expenses and add-ons and renovations and all that.
Mm-hmm.
If you instead actually save all that money and invest all that money, invest the money is a key part to that,
Yes.
but you actually end up about the same place as owning over the course of 30 years.
That's how I've looked at it. As long as you're active in the investing part,
right.
it should be okay.
Either investing in that you own the property and you're paying the mortgage and you're, or active in investing in that you're actually just putting away every month.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, you're going to be in good shape. But yeah, that's a major downside of owning. We talked about a couple of them earlier. You have, you're kind of stuck where you're at, right? Because of closing costs and moving and all the rest of it. But also everything to do with it's on you. You get the flexibility of, unlike myself, I can't go renovate my apartment.
Yeah.
You can renovate your house. You can make it absolutely everything you want it to be, but all that cost is on you.
How about from a tax basis? When you're renting, is there anything that you gain versus owning? I feel like everything in the U.S. tax-wise is really pushed towards home ownership.
It is.
Yeah.
There's no real tax benefit of renting an apartment.
It's just flexibility.
No, it's just flexibility.
So what's the downside of owning rental properties?
So downside of owning rental properties, we covered a little bit of the tax issue, taxation issues.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when you own a rental property, everything about it is on you.
Yeah.
If you're in my scenario where the garbage disposal broke and it's dumping water all over the floor, you have to hope that your tenant cares enough to clean it up.
Yeah.
I have clients who have come to me and said, hey Phil, I had this property, I bought into it, and I have a nightmare renter. I can't get rid of them. They won't pay their rent. They're trashing the building. Everything's destroyed. I'm going to have to put tens of thousands of dollars into the place just to get it rentable again.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, every month that goes by, they're not paying their rent. I still have to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
And it becomes this huge drag on them that they can't get out from underneath.
I had an agent who's going to start working for us soon, and she was talking about how one of her tenants can't pay his bills. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the tenant is talking to her like, why are you being such a bad person? It's like, you're taking money out of her pocket every month. She's not a bad person. This is her business. Yeah. It's like going to a restaurant and dining and dash. You're like, you have a service, you agreed to this service, and I understand your circumstances have changed. Totally understand that. And she's gonna try and work with him and figure something out. But through the whole process, he's treating her like she's the bad person. It's like, this is her business. This is her income. You lost her job. You don't pay. She loses her job. You're her job. Essentially, that's what the tenant is.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to be a landlord, you have to understand that it's a business.
Yeah.
And it's a full-time job whether you like it or not. You know, it's the examples my clients give me of, you know, we were on vacation, we were in Hawaii at 2 a.m. and my renter's blowing my phone up telling me that a pipe burst back in the house.
Yeah.
And like, what do? We're in Hawaii. We don't have a management company handling this. We do it ourselves. So, you know, people muddle through the best they can, but they also need to have the cash to fix it.
When I advise people that are buying property as investments, I'm like, if you can't afford the management company, you shouldn't be buying it. The management company is a line item. And if you can't work that into your budget, you probably shouldn't be doing it. If there's ever this small margin, you probably shouldn't be buying the property. Like, it has to be a clear deal. And you should never buy anything based on appreciation. I mean, you have to buy something where you know right then and there you could sell it for more the next day. And that's the key to buying right.
Right.
Otherwise, you're buying something that other people have passed up on, and you may not be savvy enough or experienced enough to understand why it was passed on. And for you, it looks like a great deal.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's something that people, like, fundamentally, a lot of people misunderstand is whether you know what you're doing or not, a realtor, no offense, a realtor will still sell you the house.
Yes.
Whether you know what you're doing or not, a realtor will still sell
Absolutely.
you the house, and the bank will still give you the loan.
Yeah.
They don't care
Yeah.
if you lose money.
Yeah.
They care that they get repaid.
Yes.
They couldn't care less.
Yes.
The bank is not your friend. It's like when you're buying a personal residence, people say, well, the bank approved me for a $300,000 loan, so I'm gonna get a house with a $300,000 loan. So the maximum is not what you should shoot for.
Yes.
They're basing that on nothing changes in your life.
Yes.
One thing goes wrong, all of a sudden you can't pay the loan back.
Bye-bye.
Right. The bank doesn't care.
No.
They're gonna take the house back from you.
Yeah. They've already sold the note.
Well,
Now
and for that matter,
Yeah.
the bank that gave you the loan doesn't own the mortgage anymore.
Correct. It's a transaction for them.
Right.
They sold it to some investor somewhere, and that's that investor's problem.
Yeah.
They just hope there's enough due diligence in the process, and that's why, we've spent the last 12 years recovering.
Yes. But yeah, so I forget where we were at. So we're on a.
Why you shouldn't own investment properties.
Well, yeah.
Are the things to worry about.
Yeah. No. So what I was saying is, so regardless of whether or not you know what you're doing, the bank's going to give you the loan. The realtor is going to sell you the property.
Yeah.
Your due diligence is your own issue. So before you go into it, it's exactly what you're talking about, is know what your numbers are. Know what you need to break even, know what you need to be profitable, know what your large expenses might be. Is the place gonna need a new roof? Does it need a new dishwasher? Does it need a furnace? Do we have to redo the floors? If your tenant comes through and destroys the place, do you have the cash to fix it?
Yeah.
I talked to some people that are in, lower income scenarios or have, lower assets, and they're talking about buying rental real estate. I said, well, if something came up and you had a $10,000 expense on the property, what would you do?
Yeah.
And the answer a lot of the time is they actually could not handle it. Which, depending on where you live, you run into other issues. You run into issues with renters' rights.
Yeah.
Also a very important thing to understand before you buy a property anywhere.
That's a big deal here in Chicago. Renters have a lot of rights.
Exactly.
If you have an eviction here, it's gonna be months before you get them out. As opposed to our warmer southern cousin states, very quick process.
Yeah. But so understanding what your tenants' rights are, absolutely huge.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is, from a financial planner's perspective, know your numbers going into it and actually plan ahead. Don't buy a investment property on a whim because you saw some video online, it seemed like a great idea, right? Know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
Know what your liability is. Know that this is a full-time job for you and you might not enjoy it.
Yeah.
know that real estate does occasionally drop in value.
Yeah.
Sometimes significantly.
You have to ask yourself, do I want to be replacing toilets? Can I pay contractors to do it? I think the best mix for anyone buying investment property is someone who's a little handy.
Sure.
They have some experience around a house. They can fix basic things. They start on that property, they move to the next one, and they just accumulate from there.
Right. But you have to be hands-on. If you want to be profitable, you have to be hands-on. It's not, you know, I see videos online all the time. It's the YouTube ads.
Yeah.
Right? And say, I'm making money while I sleep, are you? And that's just not reality in buying rental property. You're gonna have to be hands-on. And for that matter, you're a lot less flexible. If you own a rental property in Chicago and you wanna move, do you really wanna own a rental property in a state that you don't live in?
Yeah.
How are you gonna get back to manage it? How are you gonna see if your tenant's damaging the property? You can pay a management company.
So alternatives to that, let's say you can buy into, if you like the idea of real estate, but you don't have the know-how to actually service it, maybe you want to invest in a company that's doing that, or maybe you buy into a REIT. You buy shares in a REIT. And REITs often have high dividends. Any advice on that topic?
Yeah, so if you want exposure to real estate, this is one of the advantages from an investment perspective, especially when you get to higher net worth or higher investment amounts. You want to diversify out. You say, okay, well, I have X amount that's in US equities and markets, I have X amount in bonds. I want something that's not really correlated with everything else. So that if what I have in the market goes down, at least I still have the real estate and vice versa. So one of the ways people do that is they buy into REITs, which is real estate investment trust. So it's basically a whole lot of investors pool together. They pay a management company. The management company goes out, buys properties like they would any other rentals, and then they turn all that income around, give it back to the investors.
Yeah.
After taking, of course,
Lots of fees.
Healthy slice off the top.
Yeah.
They turn that around and give it back to investors. The value of the fund is the value of the real estate. It's going to have a dividend paying off from it. That can go really well. It can also go really sideways. So a lot of REITs in the last 10 years have not done well. A lot of them, especially the ones that aren't publicly traded, are they're black pits. They don't have to tell you anything about them. They can set their own valuations.
I feel like those are a scam.
A lot of them are.
A lot of them are scams.
A lot of them are, I wouldn't call it a scam, but a bad investment. And it's not necessarily that people knew that on the front end.
Yeah.
It's just turned out that way. And the downside of it is a lot of the time you have no flexibility to get out of it. The real estate investment trust company sets the rules for you.
Yeah.
I have a number of clients who have owned REITs for years, privately held REITs, and for years, and they can't get out of them. They're down 50% in value, and they're calling me asking all the time, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this? Is there anything we can do?
It's like owning a timeshare.
It's like owning a time. Yeah. And the answer is, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
It's totally up to the company, and they have no motivation to get out from under it. They're getting paid outrageous fees. They have no motivation to give you your money back.
Yeah.
Entirely different than a publicly traded REIT. But
it reminds me of a Ponzi scheme. You know, like they say a lot of Ponzi schemes were never intended to be Ponzi schemes. It was someone with good intentions who had an idea and thought he was going to win, but he lost. And his only way to propel the idea was to keep bringing in investors with the hope that he would turn this thing around. Right? And it's like a REIT's the same thing. It's a group of people that had good intentions, but probably didn't know what they were doing and made bad investments. And now, instead of them paying for it personally, it's all the shareholders.
Yeah, there were a couple...
Bad leaders.
Yeah, there were a couple of notable examples of that. ARC Realty was one out of New York that actually got in a lot of trouble with that. They kept offering new funds, and the new funds were basically just buying out the old funds. And yeah, similar issue. But But you can also buy them publicly traded, where you can buy and sell out of it daily. They can, add a bit of diversification to a portfolio. You can get a nice dividend from them, but they're not risk-free.
Yeah.
You're at the same risk as any other investment. You're at the same risk as, a lot of things. So, just know what you're getting into before you do it. I have a client of mine who had funds outside of my management, and he was in it was a triple levered mortgage REIT fund.
Okay.
Basically, the thing paid like a 20% dividend.
Mm-hmm.
And for years, it went really well for him. He was getting this 20% dividend paid to him. He's making a lot of money from it. The value, fluctuated, dropped a little bit over time.
REITs seem to be not stable. They fluctuate, but to be around the same price. Like, they don't really go up, they don't really go down. They fluctuate, but generally, I own 2 REITs. And like, even through all of this, and I bought them like early in COVID, I saw them down. One of them has a 14% dividend. One has a 6 and change percent dividend. Mm-hmm. And one thing, they can call back that dividend. It's not a guaranteed dividend. That's a huge part of it. And so I don't have a lot of money in those, but I'm like, that's an interesting kind of hedge or way to put money in different places. And that's how I'm invested in real estate publicly. And I like it for that. But I always look at it, I'm like, listen, this could stay, I think one of them's at $7 a share. I'm like, that could stay at $7 a share for the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. If I'm getting that 14% dividend, that's the payback.
Yeah, so my client, this example, he had a fund that was levered. Mm-hmm. So they had not just the money that the investors had put in, but they also had debt to buy additional real estate.
Yeah, which real estate is always levered.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the issue that he ran into was actually earlier this year in COVID, in March, when the market fell, because every percent it would normally go down, he's going down 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
And when the market dropped by 35%, his fund actually dropped by about 99%, at which point he found out, he didn't know this when he put his money into it, but he found out the fund itself had a minimum fund balance that it had to maintain.
Okay.
And if it fell below that threshold, it had to cash out.
Okay.
So it fell 98, 99%. It happened in 3 days. It fell 99%. It fell below the threshold and they cashed him out.
Oh man.
So when you looked at the market recovery that happened right after, it was a couple $100,000. And if you look at the market recovery that happened right afterward, he didn't participate in that at all.
Yeah.
Because he was cashed out of the fund.
Yeah.
It can go both ways.
I didn't know about that. So
it can go both ways.
Automatically give your money back. Like, we don't want your business anymore. We're good. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can put your dollar back in if you want.
It's the sort of thing they would never expect to happen.
Yeah.
Is the problem, right? They put these rules in, when they opened the fund 20 years ago.
It's a doomsday scenario.
It's a doomsday scenario.
Yeah.
They're saying, look, if the fund gets down to, 2 million of assets, we got 9 guys that work on the team. It no longer makes sense to have a fund.
Yeah.
So we're going to cash everybody out at that point. But they have to follow those rules. Whatever rules they put in place, they have to follow. So when it actually happened, it happened in a 3-day period right before it snapped right back.
Yeah.
They fell below the threshold, no option. Cash everyone out.
That's scary.
Yeah. So real estate can be a good way to diversify out. Again, it's the same thing I'd say to anything else, is know the investment you're getting into. Know what the potential upside is, know what the potential downside is. Anytime you see something that has a 14% dividend on it, know that it's at a much higher risk.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even, it's funny, like even through COVID, like that price is pretty much maintained for 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah. There's been a lot of fluctuations and everything else. That, not really. It's volatile, but it always ends up around that same number.
Yeah. But, so it can be a good way to invest in real estate without having to actually own it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is using publicly traded funds to do that. Owning real estate's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. That's what people don't understand. That's how I always look at it. Like, you have to be willing to put in that elbow grease.
Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, or your spouse doesn't want you doing it, or it becomes expensive or it becomes a hassle or whatever,
Don't buy it.
don't buy it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not
the best vehicle for everyone.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Not everybody should own their own home. It can be a great deal, but if you're somebody that moves around or wants flexibility, you're gonna hate it.
And don't want to maintain it.
And you don't want to maintain it.
That's my hardest thing about owning I own a condo. I live in a condo. I'm like, so if I buy a property, I got to take care of everything.
Yep.
It's intimidating, even for someone who's in real estate, right?
Well,
Someone who has experience in all of that. Still,
right.
It's just like, I like paying an HOA because the HOA deals with it. And it's
Right.
more brain power for me to focus on other things, to focus on my clients, focus on my business. So I like to free up that brain power.
And it may be more expensive the way you're doing it than
Maybe.
it would be owning.
Sometimes I wonder about that too. It's like, maybe it's more expensive until, you know, your
But it might
furnace
be
goes
worth
out
it.
and your roof goes out in the same year. And then you're like, I'd be okay with the HOA.
Yeah.
But then you get a special assessment and it all evens out.
Right. Well, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, think about like owning a car.
Yeah.
I grew up, I had used cars always. Family always had used cars, but they always broke down.
Yeah.
So you either had to be willing to fix it yourself or they become outrageously expensive
Yeah.
to maintain.
I can buy it for $3,000. It's like, great, it needs $5,000 worth of work.
Exactly. Alternatively, now I've leased cars for the last number of years.
Yeah.
It can be more expensive. It probably actually isn't more expensive than maintaining a used car
Yeah.
or an older car, unless you're doing the work yourself.
Yeah.
If you're doing the work yourself, like owning a property, if you're doing the work yourself, it's a lot cheaper. If you're paying somebody else to do it, it's going to be very expensive. I don't want to work on my own car.
Yeah.
So I'm more than happy to lease it. And whenever something goes wrong, I happily drive back to the dealership. They replace whatever broke.
Yeah.
The car I have right now, I've replaced the speakers on the door 6 times.
That's a
I've
lot.
had the car for 2.5 years.
Okay.
It's not that I listen to really loud music. I actually think there's something wrong in the seating of the speaker, but it's not my problem.
Not your problem.
So I'm really not worried about it.
For
I'm
cars,
not
I
gonna
feel like
find,
leasing almost always makes sense.
I'm not going to find whatever the issue is and fix it myself.
Yeah.
It's just every 6 months when one of the things goes bad, I drive to the dealership. They give me a comparable loaner for the day.
Yeah.
They fix the speaker. I don't pay anything for it.
Yeah.
More than happy to do that.